December 14, 1943. Stalag Luft III, 100 miles southeast of Berlin. Flight Lieutenant Robert Morrison stood in the morning roll call formation watching his breath crystallize in the air while German guards counted the same 2,847 prisoners they'd counted yesterday and would count again tomorrow. The 26-year-old RAF navigator had been here 11 months. He weighed 127 pounds. Before the war he'd weighed 168. The camp stretched across 59 acres of Silesian pine forest. 3 compounds. 9 barracks in each compound. 15 rooms per barack. 12 men per room. The arithmetic of captivity was precise and unforgiving. Morrison knew every number by heart because counting was one of the few activities that filled the hours between meager meals. German rations arrived each day at noon. Then soup, black bread, sometimes a small potato. The Red Cross estimated these rations provided 900 calories daily. A man needed 2,400 to maintain body weight. The mathematics were simple. Every prisoner was slowly starving. Morrison's hands shook during roll call. Not from cold, though the temperature was 2 degrees below freezing. The shaking came from malnutrition. Protein deficiency. His body consuming its own muscle tissue for energy. He'd watched the progression in others before seeing it in himself. First the shaking. Then the lethargy. Then the swelling in the legs. Then the mind began to slip. The commandant walked past the formations without looking at the faces. Oberst Friedrich Wilhelm von Lindiner Wildaw. Career officer. First World War veteran. He ran the camp according to Geneva Convention rules. The guards did not beat prisoners. They did not torture or execute. They simply maintained order and counted heads twice daily while the rations killed slowly and officially. Roll call ended at 0720. The prisoners shuffled back to their barracks. Morrison walked beside squadron leader James Davies, his roommate from Block 104. Davies was 31, shot down over Hamburg in July 1942, had been here 16 months. He moved carefully, rationing energy, speaking only when necessary. After 16 months, a man learned to conserve everything. Their room measured 12 feet by 15 feet. 6 double bunks built from rough timber. A single coal stove that received 1 bucket of coal per day. 12 men shared this space for 23 hours daily. The other hour was exercise period in the yard, walking circles in the wire, trying to maintain muscle mass that no longer existed. Morrison climbed into his upper bunk and lay still. Moving burned calories. Lying still preserved them. This calculation governed every decision. Walk to the latrine or use the communal bucket. Read a book or stare at the ceiling? Each choice had metabolic costs that mattered when the body was eating itself. The camp library held 3,847 books donated by the Red Cross before the war. Morrison had read 214 of them. He'd started keeping count in March, another set of numbers to occupy his mind. But lately, reading required concentration he could no longer sustain. The words blurred. His eyes wouldn't focus properly. Malnutrition affected cognition. He could feel his mind slowing like a clock winding down. Davies lay in the bunk below, not sleeping, simply lying still, breathing slowly, existing. They didn't talk much anymore. Conversation required energy. It also reminded them of things they preferred not to discuss. Home. Food. The lives they'd lived before the wire. At 11:30 the guards unlocked the barracks. The prisoners formed lines at the cookhouse. The same line they'd formed yesterday. The same line they'd form tomorrow. The soup was made from turnips and water. Sometimes there were small pieces of potato skin floating in the gray liquid. Morrison's portion filled a metal cup. He drank it slowly, letting each mouthful warm his throat before swallowing. The warmth was the best part. The black bread arrived in slices. 1 slice per man. Morrison's slice weighed perhaps 60 grams. He ate it in small bites, chewing thoroughly, trying to make it last. The bread was dense and sour. It contained sawdust to bulk out the flour. The sawdust provided no nutrition, but it filled the stomach temporarily. That was something. After the meal, Morrison returned to his bunk. 1,300 calories remained until tomorrow's soup. 16 hours. His body would burn approximately 1,500 calories lying still during those 16 hours. The deficit accumulated day by day, week by week, month by month. Basic arithmetic. He was disappearing. In the corner of the room, Flying Officer Peter Walsh sat at the small table they'd built from stolen lumber. Walsh was 24, shot down over Mannheim in May 1943, had been here 7 months. He was writing a letter home to Southampton. The Red Cross allowed 1 letter per month. Walsh wrote about the weather, about the books he was reading, about the theatrical productions the prisoners staged to pass time. He did not write about the hunger. The censors would black it out anyway. Morrison watched Walsh write with careful, measured movements. The younger man's hand trembled slightly. The tremor had started 3 weeks ago. Walsh pretended not to notice, but everyone noticed. They all watched each other for signs of deterioration. It was like observing a slow shipwreck where everyone drowned in the same predictable sequence. At 1,400, footsteps approached outside. Heavy boots on frozen ground. The guards walked past without stopping. Morrison listened to the footsteps fade. Listening was free. It cost no calories. He'd become expert at identifying sounds. The difference between routine patrols and inspection rounds. The difference between guards bringing mail and guards bringing nothing. The sound of disappointment and the sound of possibility. The Red Cross parcels had stopped arriving in September. Before that, each prisoner received one parcel per week. The parcels contained tinned milk, tinned meat, chocolate, cigarettes, tea, soap, sugar. 7 pounds of food and necessities. Those parcels meant survival. Without them, the German rations alone were inadequate. With them, a man could maintain body weight, maintain sanity, maintain hope. But in September, the deliveries ceased. No explanation. No notice. Just the absence where packages had been. The prisoners speculated constantly. Bombing had destroyed the railways. The Germans had diverted the supplies. The Red Cross had abandoned them. Every theory was plausible. None was verifiable. Now in December, 11 weeks without parcels, the camp was transforming. Men who'd maintained humor and discipline were becoming hollow. Conversations diminished. Energy evaporated. The camp orchestra stopped rehearsing because players lacked strength to lift instruments. The theater group canceled productions because actors couldn't remember lines. The escape committee suspended operations because tunneling required calories no one possessed. Morrison closed his eyes. Sleep conserved energy. Dreams cost nothing. He dreamed about breakfast in his mother's kitchen in Sussex. Eggs and bacon and toast with butter. Strong tea with milk and sugar. The smell of it, the taste, the warmth spreading through his chest. Then he woke and the dream dissolved and the hunger returned sharper than before. Dreams were expensive after all. At 1,700, the guards locked the barracks for the night. 12 men in a 12-by-15 room with darkness falling at 16:30 and dawn not arriving until 07:30. 14 hours of confinement. Morrison lay in his bunk listening to Davies breathing below. Slow breaths. Measured. Economical. Outside, wind moved through the pine trees. The sound was like water, like waves, like something flowing toward some distant shore. Morrison listened and counted breaths and calculated calories and waited for sleep that would not come because hunger kept him awake, and when it finally came, the dreams brought food that vanished upon waking. This was the mathematics of survival. 900 calories minus 2,400 calories equals 500 calories lost daily. Multiply by 7 days equals 3,500 calories weekly. Multiply by 11 weeks equals 38,500 calories total deficit. 1 pound of body weight equals 3,500 calories. Morrison had lost 11 pounds since September. His body was consuming itself at precisely the rate predicted by arithmetic. He did not know if he would survive until spring. None of them knew. They simply endured one day at a time, one meal at a time, one breath at a time, waiting for something to change, something to arrive, something to interrupt the slow, predictable mathematics of starvation. December 16, 1943. 0935. Morrison heard the trucks before anyone else. Different engines. Not the standard Wehrmacht lorries that delivered coal and bread. These were larger, heavier, grinding through gears as they navigated the camp access road. He sat up in his bunk. Davies was already sitting up below. The truck stopped at the main gate. Voices in German. The metallic sound of tailgates dropping. Then footsteps. Many footsteps. Guards and someone else. Morrison moved to the window. He wasn't supposed to approach the windows during lockdown, but today he didn't care. Other faces appeared at other windows across the compound. Through the wire, Morrison saw them. Wooden crates. Stacked on truck beds. Dozens of them. Perhaps hundreds. The crates were marked with red crosses. He stopped breathing. Davies stood beside him now, both of them pressed against the cold glass, watching. The guards began unloading. They used handcarts to move the crates from trucks to the supply warehouse. One guard dropped a crate. It hit the frozen ground and split open. Tin spilled out. Red and white labels. Morrison recognized them even from 60 yards away. Condensed milk. Spam. Chocolate rations. Someone in the barracks said, "Is that real?" His voice cracked on the last word. Walsh was at the next window. He'd been writing another letter. The pencil was still in his hand. He'd forgotten he was holding it. His eyes were fixed on the trucks, on the crates, on the tins scattered in the mud where the crate had broken. For 11 weeks, they'd convinced themselves the parcels would never return. 11 weeks of watching the road and seeing nothing. 11 weeks of recalculating how long they could survive without them. And now, without warning, without explanation, the trucks had arrived. The unloading took 90 minutes. The prisoners watched from every window in every barracks in every compound. No one spoke. Speaking felt like it might break the spell, might cause the trucks to vanish, might reveal this was another hunger dream. At 11:45, the commandant's adjutant appeared at the barracks with an announcement. Red Cross parcels would be distributed after the noon meal. 1 parcel per man. Standard protocol would resume. The adjutant left. No one moved. Morrison realized he was shaking worse than usual. Not from malnutrition now. From something else. Anticipation. Relief. Fear that this wasn't real. The noon soup came at 1200. Morrison couldn't taste it. He drank the liquid automatically while watching the window, watching for guards, watching for carts bringing crates to the compound. Davies ate his bread in silence. Walsh didn't eat at all. He simply held his bowl and stared at the door. At 13:15 the guards unlocked the barracks. The prisoners formed lines in the yard. The guards wheeled carts loaded with parcels to the center of the compound. Each parcel was a cardboard box, 12 inches by 12 inches by 6 inches, wrapped in brown paper tied with string, marked with stamps and labels and the distinctive Red Cross emblem. The guards called names alphabetically. When they called Morrison's name he stepped forward. The guard handed him a parcel. Morrison took it with both hands. It weighed approximately 11 pounds. He could feel individual items through the cardboard. Hard edges. Soft packages. The weight of it was shocking after months of emptiness. He returned to the barracks carrying the parcel carefully as if it were made of glass. His hands were still shaking. Davies was behind him with his own parcel. Walsh was further back in line, still waiting for his name to be called. Inside the room, Morrison set the parcel on his bunk and looked at it. The other men were doing the same. 12 prisoners, 12 parcels, everyone staring at brown cardboard boxes as if they were religious artifacts. Someone said, "Should we open them now?" No one answered. The question seemed too large. Opening the parcel meant confronting what was inside. It meant acknowledging this was real. It meant allowing hope after 11 weeks of learning to live without it. Morrison's parcel had been damaged in transit. One corner was crushed. A tin had punctured through the bottom. He could see bright metal through the tear in the cardboard. He carefully undid the string, then unwrapped the brown paper, then lifted the lid. Inside, the contents were packed tightly. 1 tin of clim powdered milk, 1 tin of corned beef, 1 tin of Spam, 1 package of raisins, 1 bar of chocolate, 1 package of prunes, 1 tin of salmon, 1 package of sugar, 1 package of tea, 1 package of biscuits, 1 bar of soap, 5 cigarettes. Morrison lifted out the chocolate bar. A Cadbury's ration. 4 ounces. He'd last eaten chocolate in August. The wrapper was intact. He could smell it through the paper. Cocoa and sugar and milk. His mouth watered so intensely it hurt. Around the room, men were unpacking their parcels with religious care. Lifting out each item. Examining it. Setting it down. Not eating yet. Just looking. Confirming. Believing. Davies opened his tin of corned beef with his pocket knife. The lid peeled back to reveal pressed meat packed in gelatin. The smell filled the room instantly. Salt and fat and protein. Davies sat on his bunk holding the tin, not moving, just breathing the smell. Walsh's parcel was different from the others. His had been crushed in transit. The cardboard was partially collapsed. When he opened it, he found that the chocolate had melted and re-solidified around the other items. The biscuits were broken. One tin had split and leaked. But everything was there. Damaged but present. Walsh pulled out the broken biscuits. Crumbs and fragments mixed with leaked condensed milk, creating a sweet paste. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he began to cry. Not sobbing. Just tears running down his face while he held broken biscuits in his hands. No one said anything. Morrison understood. They all understood. It wasn't about the biscuits. It wasn't about the chocolate or the milk or the meat. It was about the fact that somewhere far away beyond the wire, beyond the guards, beyond Germany, someone had packed these items in a cardboard box. Someone had addressed it. Someone had shipped it. Someone had cared enough to send hope in a broken crate to men who'd been convinced no one remembered they existed. Morrison opened his chocolate bar. He broke off a single square. Half an ounce. He placed it on his tongue and let it melt. The sweetness was overwhelming. His body had forgotten sugar. The sensation was almost painful. He closed his eyes and let the chocolate dissolve slowly, tasting every molecule. That night, after the evening roll call, after the guards locked the barracks, the 12 men in room 7 of Block 104 sat around the table they'd built from stolen lumber, and they shared food from their parcels. Not everything. They'd learned discipline during 11 weeks of deprivation. But something. A tin of Spam divided 12 ways, fried on the coal stove. Biscuits and tea. Sugar in the tea. Milk powder mixed with water. The meal lasted 30 minutes. The food was rationed carefully. No one ate more than a small portion. Their stomachs couldn't handle large amounts after months of near starvation. But the taste, the warmth, the sense of fullness, even temporary, even partial. These things mattered more than calories. Morrison lay in his bunk that night with food in his stomach for the first time in weeks. Real food. Food that contained protein and fat and sugar. His body recognized it immediately. The shaking in his hands had diminished. The fog in his mind had lifted slightly. He could feel his body beginning to rebuild itself, cell by cell, molecule by molecule. Outside, wind moved through the pines. But tonight the sound was different. Not waves pulling away from shore. Something else. Something arriving. January 1944. The parcels continued arriving weekly through the new year. One per man per week, sometimes two if supplies permitted. Morrison gained back 4 pounds by the end of January. His hands stopped shaking. His mind cleared. The 16-hour fast between meals became bearable when he knew a parcel contained reserves. But the parcels changed more than bodies. They changed the social architecture of the camp. Before the parcels, men had been too depleted for complex social interaction. Conversation required energy. Planning required cognitive capacity. Friendship required emotional resources no one possessed. The camp had been atomized into individual survival units. Each man focused on his own endurance, his own arithmetic of starvation. The parcels restored capacity for community. Men who'd been silent for weeks began talking again. Not much at first. Just fragments. Comments about the weather. Observations about guards. Small exchanges that meant the brain was working well enough for language again. Morrison noticed it first in Davies. The squadron leader had been virtually catatonic in December, lying in his bunk 18 hours daily, moving only when absolutely necessary. In January, Davies got up voluntarily. He walked to the library. He borrowed a book. He read it. He discussed it with Morrison. The change was subtle but profound. Davies had rejoined the living. The parcels also created an economy. Before, there'd been nothing to trade. The German rations were minimal and identical. Everyone received the same thin soup, the same black bread, the same small potato. But the parcels contained variety. One man preferred chocolate. Another preferred cigarettes. Another preferred tea. These preferences enabled exchange. Walsh became the room's unofficial banker. He kept a ledger of who owed what to whom. 2 cigarettes equaled 1 chocolate bar. 1 tin of Spam equaled 3 tins of powdered milk. The exchange rates were negotiated democratically during evening discussions around the small table. The economy wasn't about accumulating wealth. It was about creating choices. After months of absolute deprivation, the ability to trade chocolate for cigarettes meant autonomy, meant agency, meant the return of a kind of freedom within captivity. The parcels also enabled resistance. In February, the escape committee resumed operations. Tunneling required calories. Disposing of excavated sand required energy. Forging documents required cognitive clarity. None of these activities had been possible during the 11 weeks without parcels. Now they became feasible again. Morrison wasn't part of the tunnel operations. His role was different. He was assigned to watch the guards, to track patterns, to identify windows of vulnerability. This required alertness he hadn't possessed in December. The parcels had restored his mind enough to perform the work. The primary tunnel was called Tom. It extended 348 feet from Block 123 toward the pine forest beyond the wire. 30 men worked on it, digging in shifts, disposing of sand in carefully hidden locations throughout the compound. The work was meticulous and exhausting. Every man involved supplemented German rations with parcel food to maintain the strength required. Morrison's observation post was the window in room 7. He sat there for 2 hours each morning watching guard movements, noting times, recording patterns in a small notebook he'd made from stolen paper. The data accumulated slowly. By March, he'd identified a 20-minute gap in patrols that occurred between 03:10 and 03:30 each morning. This gap would become critical during the escape attempt. But the parcels also revealed uncomfortable truths. In March, the Red Cross supplies ran low again. Not a complete cessation like September, but a reduction. 1 parcel every 2 weeks instead of weekly. The camp commandant explained that Allied bombing had destroyed railway infrastructure. Supply chains were disrupted. The reduction was temporary. The prisoners responded differently than they'd responded to the previous cessation. In September they'd simply endured. In March, with memories of adequate food still fresh, the reduction felt like a theft. Anxiety replaced patience. Men who'd been calm in December became agitated in March. Hope, once restored, created new vulnerabilities. Walsh's tremor returned. He'd been stable in January and February. By mid-March, with reduced rations, the shaking came back. His letters home became shorter. His handwriting deteriorated. He stopped attending the evening discussions around the table. Morrison tried talking to him. Walsh said he was fine. He said the reduction was temporary. He said the tremor was nothing. But Morrison recognized the signs. The body didn't lie. Walsh was slipping back into the deficit. In late March, the parcels resumed full weekly distribution. The crisis passed. Walsh's tremor diminished. But something had changed. The men had learned that hope could be withdrawn. The parcels weren't permanent. They were contingent on railways and supply chains and factors beyond anyone's control. The security they'd felt in January was revealed as fragile. On March 24, 1944, at 2,230 hours, the tunnel breakout occurred. 76 men escaped through Tunnel Harry, Tom and Dick having been discovered. Morrison wasn't among them. His role had been observation and intelligence. He provided the patrol timing data that made the escape possible. But he hadn't been selected for the actual breakout. He watched from the window as the last man entered the tunnel. Then he returned to his bunk. Davies was already asleep. Walsh was at the table, writing another letter, his hands steady in the candlelight. The escape failed. 73 of 76 escapees were recaptured. 50 were executed by the Gestapo. The camp went into lockdown for weeks. No parcels during lockdown. No mail. No exercise. Just confinement and German rations and the return of hunger. Morrison felt the deficit immediately. By the second week of lockdown, his hands were shaking again. By the third week he was back in his bunk 18 hours daily, conserving calories, counting breaths, waiting. But something was different this time. In September, when parcels had stopped, Morrison had felt the world contracting, had felt himself shrinking into isolation and survival. In April, with parcels suspended during lockdown, he still felt connected. He'd tasted adequacy. He'd experienced community. He'd participated in resistance. These memories sustained him when the food did not. The broken crates had contained more than rations. They'd contained proof that the outside world existed, that someone remembered the prisoners existed, that captivity wasn't permanent. These truths couldn't be withdrawn even when the parcels could. Walsh died during lockdown. Not from execution. From malnutrition complicated by pneumonia. His body, weakened by months of deprivation, couldn't fight the infection. The doctors couldn't help. There were no antibiotics in the camp. Walsh died on April 19, 3 weeks after the escape attempt, 4 days before his 25th birthday. They buried him in the camp cemetery. Morrison stood at the graveside with Davies and the other men from Room 7. The chaplain read from a prayer book donated by the Red Cross. The guards watched from a distance. After the service, the prisoners returned to the barracks in silence. That night, Morrison opened Walsh's locker. The young officer had saved his last parcel, hadn't opened it, had been conserving it for some future moment that never came. Morrison looked at the brown cardboard box for a long time. Then he opened it. Inside, the standard items: milk, meat, chocolate, tea. Also a letter Walsh had been writing home. He hadn't finished it. The last line read, "The food parcels keep us going. Knowing that people care makes all the difference." Morrison folded the letter carefully. He added it to the outgoing mail pile. The Red Cross would forward it to Southampton. Walsh's family would receive their son's last words. They'd learned that he'd been thinking of them, that he'd been hopeful, that he'd acknowledged the parcels mattered. The lockdown ended in early May. Parcels resumed. Morrison's hands stopped shaking again. His mind cleared again. His body rebuilt itself again. But Walsh's bunk remained empty. Davies moved to a lower bunk in another room. New prisoners arrived to fill the spaces left by executed escapees. By June 1944, the parcels had been arriving regularly for 5 months. Morrison had gained back all the weight he'd lost. His cognitive function had fully returned. He was reading again, writing again, participating in camp activities. The broken crate that had arrived in December now seemed distant, like something from another lifetime. But he remembered. He remembered the weight of that first parcel. He remembered the smell of chocolate. He remembered Walsh crying over broken biscuits. These memories were precise and permanent. They defined the boundary between survival and deterioration, between hope and despair, between remembering you're human and forgetting entirely. May 8, 1945. Liberation Day. Soviet tanks arrived at Stalag Luft III in the morning, smashing through the main gate, crushing the guardhouses, tearing down the wire. The German guards had fled during the night. The camp was empty except for prisoners who were now suddenly not prisoners anymore. Morrison stood in the yard watching the tanks roll past. He'd been a prisoner for 2 years and 4 months. Now, without ceremony, without transition, he was free. The word felt abstract. He'd forgotten what freedom meant. The Soviets distributed food. Real food. Meat and bread and cheese. Morrison ate slowly. His stomach had shrunk. Large portions caused pain. But the taste was extraordinary. After 2 years of German rations and Red Cross parcels, fresh bread was revelation. He was repatriated to Britain in June, flown from Poland to Suffolk on a Lancaster bomber. The journey took 6 hours. He spent the entire flight looking out the window at the English Channel, at the white cliffs, at the green fields of home. Everything looked smaller than he remembered. The world had contracted during captivity. Now it was expanding again, overwhelming. His family met him at the airfield. His mother cried. His father shook his hand. They drove home to Sussex in silence. Morrison sat in the back seat watching the countryside pass. Woods and villages and farms. Normal life continuing. He felt like a ghost returned from death, invisible, disconnected, unable to integrate what he'd experienced with what he was seeing. At home, his mother prepared dinner. Roast chicken and potatoes and vegetables and gravy. Morrison ate 2 bites and stopped. Too rich. Too much. His body rejected it. He excused himself and went outside, stood in the garden in the twilight, breathing slowly, trying to adjust. That night he unpacked his belongings. The RAF had returned his personal effects, the items he'd been carrying when shot down. Among them was the notebook where he'd recorded guard patrol patterns during tunnel operations. He opened it and saw his handwriting from March 1944. The entries were precise and methodical. They looked like they'd been written by a different person. He also found the letter Walsh had been writing when the parcels arrived in December. Morrison had kept it, had carried it through liberation and repatriation. He read it again now. The food parcels keep us going. Knowing that people care makes all the difference. Morrison wrote to Walsh's family. He told them about the parcels, about the December delivery, about how their son had cried tears of relief over broken biscuits. He tried to explain that the parcels had meant more than food, that they'd been proof of connection, evidence that the world beyond the wire still existed and still remembered. The letter took 3 attempts to write. He kept editing, trying to find words adequate to the experience. Finally, he gave up trying to be adequate and simply described what had happened. The trucks, the crates, the smell of chocolate, the weight of the parcel, the tears. Walsh's mother wrote back. She thanked Morrison for the letter. She said the Red Cross had notified her of the parcel program. She'd donated money to support it. She'd organized fundraisers in Southampton. She'd collected chocolate and cigarettes and soap. She hadn't known if the parcels were reaching her son. Now she knew they had. That knowledge mattered to her. Morrison kept her letter. He also kept the notebook with patrol patterns and the torn corner of brown cardboard from the December parcel. These items became his archive of captivity. Not officially. Just personally. Objects that contained memory. He didn't talk about the camp much. His family asked occasionally. He gave brief answers. Yes, it was difficult. No, the guards weren't cruel. Yes, he was grateful to be home. The conversations were superficial. He didn't know how to convey the experience of starvation, the mathematics of calorie deficit, the sensation of feeling your mind slow down as your body consumed itself. In 1947, Morrison attended a reunion of Stalag Luft III survivors. 37 men gathered at a pub in London. They drank beer and told stories and laughed about things that hadn't been funny at the time. Morrison sat quietly listening. He recognized faces but struggled to remember names. The camp had blurred individual identity. Everyone had looked the same at the end. Thin. Exhausted. Identical in deprivation. During the reunion, someone mentioned the December 1943 parcel delivery. The conversation stopped. Everyone remembered. One man said he'd kept the string from his parcel, had tied it around his wrist like a bracelet, had worn it throughout captivity as a reminder. Another man said he'd saved 1 tin of chocolate, had never opened it, had carried it through liberation and repatriation, still had it in his closet at home. Davies was at the reunion. He looked healthy, solid, nothing like the skeletal figure Morrison remembered from December 1943. They talked briefly. Davies was working in Birmingham now. Civil engineering. Married. Had a daughter. Life had continued after the wire. They didn't discuss Walsh. His name wasn't mentioned. But Morrison knew everyone was thinking about him. About the men who hadn't survived. About the arbitrary nature of who lived and who died. About the fact that parcels had saved most but not all. The reunion ended at midnight. Morrison walked back to his hotel through London streets. The city was rebuilding after the Blitz. Construction cranes lined the horizon. Scaffolding covered damaged buildings. Everything was in transition, moving from war to peace, from destruction to restoration. Morrison understood that transition. His body had rebuilt itself after starvation. His mind had recovered cognitive function after malnutrition. But something remained broken. Some part of him was still behind the wire, still lying in the bunk, still counting calories, still waiting for the trucks to arrive. In 1952, Morrison visited the Red Cross headquarters in Geneva. He didn't have a specific reason. Just curiosity. He wanted to see where the parcels had originated, wanted to understand the logistics of hope. A staff member gave him a tour. They showed him the warehouse where parcels were assembled. Shelves of tins and packages and chocolate. Workers packing cardboard boxes with methodical efficiency. Each box identical. Each box containing the same 11 pounds of supplies. Each box capable of sustaining life for 1 week. The staff member explained the system. Donations came from multiple countries. Britain, America, Canada, Australia. The Red Cross purchased additional supplies with donated funds. They assembled standardized parcels, shipped them by rail and truck and shipped to camps across Germany and Poland. The operation was enormous. Millions of parcels. Millions of pounds of food. All organized and distributed through careful logistics. Morrison asked about the September 1943 supply disruption. The staff member checked records. The cessation had been caused by Allied bombing of railways in southern Germany. The Red Cross had rerouted deliveries through Denmark, but the new route took additional time to establish. The 11-week gap wasn't intentional. Just the consequence of war disrupting infrastructure. Morrison thanked the staff member. He walked back to his hotel through Geneva streets. The information was useful. It confirmed what he'd suspected. But it didn't change the experience. Knowing why the parcels stopped didn't alter the memory of starvation. Understanding logistics didn't diminish the sensation of hope arriving in a broken crate. In 1967, Morrison's daughter asked him to speak at her school about the war. She was 14. Her history class was studying World War II. She wanted her father to share his experiences. Morrison agreed reluctantly. He stood in front of 30 teenagers and tried to explain. He talked about the camp, the wire, the guards, the rations, the parcels. He showed them the torn corner of cardboard he'd saved from December 1943. He explained what it had meant to receive that broken crate. The students listened politely. They asked questions. How cold was it? Did you try to escape? Were you scared? Morrison answered as honestly as he could. But he saw their incomprehension. They couldn't grasp what it meant to be so hungry your hands shook, so depleted your mind slowed, so isolated you forgot the outside world existed. One student asked why the parcels mattered so much if prisoners received German rations. Morrison tried to explain the mathematics. 900 calories versus 2,400. The weekly deficit. The accumulating loss. The sense of disappearing. But the numbers were abstract. The students nodded without understanding. After the presentation, Morrison's daughter hugged him. She said she was proud. She said the students had learned a lot. Morrison smiled and said nothing. He knew they hadn't learned. Not really. Some things couldn't be taught. Only experienced. And he wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. That night, Morrison lay in bed thinking about the question. Why did the parcels matter so much? He'd spent 24 years trying to answer that question for himself. 24 years since liberation. 24 years of normal life with adequate food and freedom and safety. 24 years of trying to integrate captivity into identity. The parcels had mattered because they'd been proof. Proof that kindness existed during cruelty. Proof that organization persisted during chaos. Proof that anonymous strangers cared enough to pack cardboard boxes and ship them across hostile territory to men they'd never meet. That proof had been essential. More essential than calories. More essential than protein or fat or sugar. The broken crate hadn't just brought food. It had brought evidence that humanity survived war. That evidence had sustained Morrison through the remainder of captivity and through 24 years of peace. It sustained him still. In 1993, Morrison died at age 76. Heart failure. Quick and painless. His family found his possessions carefully organized. Among them, the notebook with patrol patterns, the torn corner of cardboard, Walsh's unfinished letter, correspondence with Walsh's mother. His daughter read the letter Walsh had written in December 1943. The food parcels keep us going. Knowing that people care makes all the difference. She understood then, 50 years later, what her father had been trying to explain at her school. The parcels weren't about food. They were about the knowledge that beyond the wire, beyond the hunger, beyond the isolation, people remembered you existed. She donated her father's archive to the Imperial War Museum. The items were catalogued and preserved. The torn cardboard. The notebook. The letters. They joined thousands of other artifacts from thousands of other prisoners. Each object containing memory. Each memory containing truth about survival and hope and the unexpected ways grace arrives during darkness. The museum archivist who processed Morrison's collection noticed the cardboard fragment. She recognized the markings. Red Cross parcel, 1943 production run. Standard issue. Millions identical. She filed it carefully in acid-free storage, another piece of history preserved. But she didn't know the fragment story. Didn't know about December 16, 1943. Didn't know about Morrison watching trucks arrive. Didn't know about Walsh crying over broken biscuits. Didn't know about the weight of that first parcel, the smell of chocolate, the sensation of hope returning after 11 weeks of its absence. The cardboard fragment sits in storage now. Catalogued. Preserved. Silent. A piece of torn packaging that once contained 11 pounds of supplies that saved a man's life. Not just physically. Something more fundamental. Something about remembering you're human when circumstances conspire to make you forget. The broken crate arrived 80 years ago. The men who received it are mostly gone now. But the memory persists in archives and letters and stories passed between generations. Memory of trucks arriving without warning. Memory of crates splitting open. Memory of hope arriving damaged but intact. Memory that beyond any wire, beyond any hunger, connection endures if someone cares enough to pack a box and send it into darkness, trusting it will reach those who need it most. That trust was validated in December 1943. It's validated again each time the story is remembered, each time someone learns that hope can arrive in unexpected forms, that broken delivery matters less than the act of sending, that 11 pounds of supplies can mean the difference between disappearing and enduring. Morrison knew this. Walsh knew it. Davies knew it. Every man in every barracks and every compound knew it when those trucks arrived and the crates split open and the tins spilled out into frozen mud. They knew then that someone, somewhere, remembered they existed. That knowledge was more sustaining than any food. The broken crate contained survival. But more than survival. It contained proof that in the midst of deliberate cruelty, deliberate kindness persists. That proof mattered in 1943. It matters still. It will matter as long as anyone remembers the sound of trucks arriving without warning, the weight of a parcel in shaking hands, the taste of chocolate melting on a starving tongue, the sensation of hope arriving exactly when it seemed most impossible, most needed, most essential to the act of remaining human when everything conspired toward its opposite.